So thank you very much. So this is the second lecture in our lecture series this year, which are focusing on the qualitative using system dynamic as a qualitative tool in policy making. Sorry, I'm just doing many things, so that's why I'm a little bit struggling. So today we are really fortunate to have with us Mariana Mirabile from OECD. So she's an economist by background with a passion for improving system based on. She's working at the Environmental Directorate in OECD, right? She's co-developed with her colleague the process system innovation for net zero, which I think she will also share with us today. In this talk, she will share with us two things, also among others. One is about the transport strategy for net zero system by design, which is the report that published in 2021 by OECD, which set out the framework for transport system design. And then in followed by the second report, which is the redesigning island transport for net zero, which then apply this framework in a case study of Ireland. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. And without further ado, can I hand over to Mariana to share with us her experience on this two report. Thank you.
Sure, many thanks, Berafan. Many thanks to the transportation, especially into the group on the Systems Dynamic Society for the invitation, and of course to all of you for your time and for being here. As Berafan mentioned, my name is Mariana. I sit at the climate change mitigation team at the Environment Directorate, and I'm an economist and a statistician. I am not a system dynamicist. I would like to make that clear from the onset. I am, however, an advocate of systems dynamics. I see this as a fundamental tool to inform policymaking, and that's what I'm trying to do, to bring some systems dynamics to the OECD and to the policy sphere. I will be presenting an example of how we have used qualitative systems dynamics, in particular causal loop diagrams, in our work. For me to maybe tailor the presentation to your interest as much as possible, I wanted to ask how many of you are here mainly interested in how the methodology, how systems dynamics was applied. So that is my first question, and then I will ask you how many of you are here or would also be interested in the content in terms of policy recommendations for the transport sector as a result of that. So to the first question, if you can maybe use your thumb up as a reaction or a check for the first one, method. Who would like to hear a lot about the method for me to more or less know? Okay.
I will take count for you, Mariana.
Okay, so I see 12 or 13 people. Okay, let's wait for those reactions to go down. And in particular, how many of you, there are still 4 up, so give me 1 sec, could be interested really in the policy recommendations on transport? For me to know how to balance. Yes, okay, so I see more or less. Okay, so I will do my best to do both. Let me share my screen, and I need to do that with audio, as we just saw with Berafan, so give me 1 sec.
I saw Simon raise hand, but I guess that's a thumb up for you, right, Simon? So.
Yeah, okay, so you should be able to see my screen. All good, yeah?
Yeah.
Full screen, super. So let me share with you, so our process in the systems innovation for net zero. I will briefly introduce our work, look into the approach we are taking to then focus on how we're using systems dynamics. I will then dig a little bit more into the results, then since there is interest on that, on transport, and then we will open for discussion. I will try to not take too long for the presentation, so that we have more space for questions, and then via your questions I can try to respond and to give information that is close to your interests. So as an introduction, as I mentioned, I sit at the Climate Change Environment Directorate. Our task is really to help governments develop or design their net zero strategies in different sectors. we have mainly worked so far, and we take a specific angle to that, which is that we use system thinking for helping countries develop their net zero strategies. We, based on the IPCC, the International Panel of Experts on Climate Change, that calls for transformative or systemic change. Our starting point is that incremental changes are not enough, and that we really need to transform systems. And for doing that, we need to be able to observe systems, and that's where system thinking and systems dynamics help us with. We have mainly worked on the transport sector, as I mentioned. We are currently moving into the residential sector, and hopefully in the future, we will move as well into food systems and energy. We have, I will mainly talk about this second report. The way we have worked on this is that we have first published a report on transport strategies for net zero from a systemic lens. And basically in this report, we are trying to respond to the question why people choose cars for the bulk of their trips, and what could policies do so that they choose other modes. And in the second report, Designing Ireland's Transport for Net Zero, we looked into the Irish policies, and we tried to assess their transformative potential. A little bit of context on that Irish project. Basically, Ireland has very ambitious targets to reduce emissions in the sector by half by 2030. It's really an ambitious target. And what they found is that the strategies that they have in place to get there does not allow them to get there. So they assess a gap between the emission reductions they can get and the ones they would like to get. And that's where we started collaborating with them and trying to see, okay, why is it, what is it that we could be doing differently in these strategies so that we get to that target. And I will tell you more about what are the results of this study. Let me maybe share with you a short video that describes the approach we're taking, the 3 steps we're taking, and I will explain where systems dynamic fits in there. It's a 2-minute video, and I hope you can hear the sound. If you don't, please open your mic and tell me.
Systems Innovation for Net Zero is an OECD process that helps governments design effective and politically feasible climate strategies, able to trigger the transformational change needed to reach the net zero goals. In this project with the Irish government, we applied our process to Ireland's transport sector, with the aim of supporting them in reaching their 2030 and 2050 climate goals. As part of this case study, we conducted interviews with high-level officials and key stakeholders, visited different Irish territories, carried out workshops with climate policymakers, service providers, and academics, and will be producing a policy recommendation report. Based on systems thinking insights, the OECD process consists of 3 steps. Envision the outcomes a well-functioning system achieves, how our streets could look, and how our territories could be transformed. Understand why the current system's functioning is not achieving such outcomes, and which are the dynamics leading us to unsustainable results. Therefore, being able to shift the focus from the consequences to understanding the root causes and tackling high leverage points. Identify policy packages able to redesign systems so that by design, they achieve the envisioned outcomes. Providing a way to achieve GHG emission reductions at the speed required while also improving well-being.
So basically, in a nutshell, that's our project. And if I need to emphasize one thing there, is that what we're trying to do with a systemic approach is really to shift policymakers' attention from events and patterns from reacting and anticipating to those events and patterns. In the example of the transport sector, we see growing car use. We often assume that pattern is inevitable, that's people preferences, as there's nothing we can do with it. And so most of the efforts go into electrifying some of that fleet, right? Which is something we need to do. The issue is that if we only focus on electrifying a growing fleet, we find that it's very difficult, and we can do much more than that with policies. In Ireland, what we found is that 2/3 of the emission reductions in their strategies were expected to come from better vehicles. And thus the idea of using systems dynamics and system thinking is really to shift or to balance policymakers' attention between reacting and anticipating and between transforming systems. And for transforming system, of course, we need to make that system visible. And also we need to make the mental models and the ideas that have shaped that systems visible. So that's really what we are trying to do. As was explained in the video, a 3-step process. So the first one is really to envision the results a well-functioning system achieves. For transport with Ireland, we have defined well-functioning transport systems as those where people can walk, cycle, or use shared transport for the bulk of their trips. So that is the pattern of behavior that emerged from well-functioning transport systems. That's how we defined it, because we know that is correlated with good well-being outcomes. And then the next question that we ask ourselves is really to understand why is it that our current systems are not leading to that pattern of behavior, but instead to growing car use. And there is where we get into the systems dynamics underlying car dependency. I will get there in a few seconds. Once we have understood that, and only once we have understood that, then we think about policies. We think about what are the policies that can push on those high leverage points that we have identified thanks to systems dynamics, and so that we revert some of those undesirable dynamics, or let's say we trigger virtuous cycle, and I will provide an example of that as well. Up to there, all good. Anything that is unclear that you would like to ask? Just a clarification question. There will be space for comments, for more broad comments. I don't see any hand. Please help me if you see and I don't see it. Okay, that's fine. So let me continue. Let me move into really the systems dynamics part. Here I have 2 short videos for you. One is describes the structure of the system underlying car dependency and growing car use. This is a fairly generic model. It's based on Sterman's model on the Business Dynamics book. And then we have tailored that system to Ireland, and we depending on the context, via interviews, etc., we do some tailoring of that system. We find it to be fairly applicable to many territories, unfortunately, that are car dependent. The second video I will show you is how the implementation of one of the key policies that we recommend Ireland to scale up can modify those dynamics. So let me go to the first video.
Systems Innovation for Net Zero is an OECD process to help policymakers identify transformative policies to reach international climate goals while improving well-being. This video will focus on the second step of the process, understanding systems. Causal loop diagrams are one of the systems thinking tools used for understanding and mapping out the structure, relationships, and dynamics of a system. We will use the transport sector as an example. Historically, policymakers have focused their efforts on public investment in roads for car use. This has led to a chain of events. Public investment in roads for car use leads to increased road capacity for cars. As congestion and travel time by car is reduced, the attractiveness of driving a car increases, leading to increased traffic volume. As the traffic volume goes up, so does congestion and the public pressure on policymakers to reduce such congestion. And no one likes to be stuck in traffic jams. Most countries have responded to this pressure by further investing in road capacity for cars, leading to induced car demand. In parallel, increased road capacity allows individuals to live further and further away from the goods and services they need. As road capacity for cars increases, so does the catchment area. That is the size of the region accessible within an acceptable daily travel time. This leads to increased traffic volume and congestion, as more and more people travel longer distances by car to meet their needs. This phenomenon is known as urban sprawl. Because of urban sprawl, individuals are more dependent on private cars. As city sprawl and the daily distances traveled increases, public transport often takes longer and provides less access to places than driving a car. Walking and cycling are also less of an option as distances increase, leading to the low attractiveness of sustainable modes. To learn more, watch our videos on transformational climate strategies that work for people and the planet.
So basically that model, again, tailored for Ireland, was a little bit a basis for us to show that growing car use is not only dependent upon people's preference, which is an assumption that is there in transport policy making, at least in our experience, and that there is a system that has been designed in a certain way that leads to that, and that if we keep that system, same old system, same old results, and that we need policies that really will influence that structure and to something else. We identified the road capacity for car as being a key leverage point for policies. And next, I don't have slides on that, but in addition to causal loop diagrams, we also do stock and flows analysis that help us understand the lock-in of the system, and that's complement causal loop diagrams. And that's basically my next video is about one of the key policies we recommend Ireland to scale up is road space reallocation. Basically, the idea is that as long as most of the public space is allocated and used by private cars, the attractiveness of other modes will remain lower than the attractiveness of cars, which is fairly obvious, right? And that's so there are a lot of efforts to improve public transport and to really improve those modes, but space is a key limiting factor for those modes to become more attractive than cars, which is what needs to happen for most people to walk, cycle, or use shared modes for the bulk of their trips. And that's one of the key policy recommendations is to reallocate road space, and here is what that could do to the dynamics according to our analysis.
As explained in our previous video, car-dependent systems are characterized by three dynamics: induced car demand, urban sprawl, and the sustainable mode's low attractiveness trap. What would happen if instead of trying to reduce congestion by increasing road capacity for cars, policies reallocated public space to other modes? Road space reallocation can break a key link in the car-dependent transport system. By reducing capacity for cars, the reallocation of road space liberates space for sustainable modes. Walking, cycling, and shared transport becomes more attractive, and more people can use them for the bulk of their trips. As more and more people experience the benefits of streets designed for people rather than for cars, the public pressure to enhance sustainable modes increases, which can lead to further reallocation of road space, further reducing road capacity for cars and liberating space for sustainable modes and other uses, such as green spaces. A transport system in which space is allocated to sustainable modes and to creating proximity between people and the places they need to get to produces less emissions, requires less energy, and improves health, safety, and access to opportunities for all.
So we did this type of analysis on how the policy impacts the system's dynamics for 7 policy categories. We did that for EV subsidies, carbon and road prices, improvements in public transport, and several others that I will show just now. So we did this analysis with all of them, and we have via the causal loop diagram, stock and flows analysis, and as well we did kind of mental model analysis. We identify which policies could revert or reinforce unsustainable dynamics, and thus have a higher probability of transforming the system. In terms of results of this Irish report, just in a nutshell. So I'm here now a little bit at the redesign step of the policy assessment we do here at the redesign step, which is where we identify the policies to prioritize. This is what we are really interested in. The rest is a little bit of a process to get there. In a nutshell, the key results we find we have in Ireland is that car-dependent systems are at the roots of high emissions. These car-dependent systems have been shaped with a mental model that is really focused on improving mobility and maximizing speed and ignoring the importance of proximity. So one of our key recommendations is really to change the goal of policymakers from proximity to accessibility, which is the combination of mobility and proximity. Then we find that policies can help Ireland transition towards sustainable systems that are not car dependent and that are not leading to growing car use. And for that, we need to reprioritize efforts towards transformative policies. The key transformative policies that we have found, I thought I had a slide, sorry, are road space relocation. That's the first one. The second one is the mainstreaming or integration of on-demand shared services, the e-bikes, shared cars, because that can significantly increase the functionality of public or of shared transport more quickly than if we need to do everything with public transport. They are particularly good at the last mile. And then the third key recommendation is communication efforts away from car-centric models and towards shedding light on the benefits of sustainable transport systems, really, and as well communication efforts around the importance of focusing on accessibility rather than mobility, with this idea that the same ideas will produce a very similar system and we really need a different one. We often present the results. I will not go into the detail of this, but just to show you the way we present the results, we use the iceberg model. Has been an useful analogy in our experience to explain that we are often paying attention to this part and we need to pay more attention here. These are the three policies that I just explained. We then find that, for example, EV incentives and brownfield infill targets, I can get into detail if useful, are really not transforming the system structure or the mental models. We even find that EV incentives are reinforcing car-centric mindsets. We are also talking about the limitations of carbon pricing when not implemented in tandem with these type of policies, and how carbon pricing can be more effective when implemented in parallel to what we call transformative policies. So these are the policies we are asking them we're suggesting to prioritize. These are the one we're suggesting to keep and strengthen, but in particular to implement coupled with this one and not without this one. And these are the ones that we think need to be rethought. If you're okay, I will stop there. That was a lot of information on my side, maybe. So let me stop there and could begin to discuss and hear from you. I'm happy to tell you more, but please tell me what would you like to hear. Thanks.
Thank you, Mariana. So I think we can open the floor for question, and the link to the report that you just mentioned, I will put it in the chat box as we continue our discussion. You already have, so wonderful. I mean, is there anyone would like to kickstart the Q&A? Otherwise, I can also start with a question. I think thank you for sharing that. Really wonderful to see that you're putting you kind of mainstreaming the system dynamic approach in transport policy making, and having experience to apply that into the island case. Is there any reflection that you can share with us? How the policy maker react to what the approach itself and also the result. How was it?
Sure. Many thanks for that question. The reaction was very positive. It was extremely positive, and I will not maybe show it right now, but I have a fourth video where you can hear Irish stakeholders reacting to the So there you have in the chat, to the process. They have found the process, and in particular, I think the systems dynamics part is a key part of it. The terms they use were eye-opener, for example. I think it helped reframe the discussion from better vehicles to better systems. What was important for us and what was a struggle for us was to present this in a visual way and in as simple as possible way. So the combination of the iceberg model and the causal loop diagrams worked very well. What we had in the process of producing this report, we had a lot of comments from colleagues on how difficult it was to read causal loop diagrams. That was a real struggle. So we have in every presentation tried to go step by step and really take the time to explain each link. Then when one gets used to reading them, it becomes easier, but really people not knowing where to start to read the causal loop diagram, stuff that I'm sure you're familiar with, that is something we put a lot of efforts on really improving the communication of those causal loop diagrams so that they can inform the discussion. The process and the approach and the in particular the causal loop diagrams, stock and flow analysis, we use a bathtub analogy based a little bit on meadows, and it was also very, very welcome. And you see that the analogies work when you hear the analogy being used in the breakout groups, right? And people repeating those. So that was very, very useful from the feedback we got.
Oh, wonderful. Just follow up with, having applied this framework in Ireland case, right? The framework that you proposed, is there a work that, being further enhanced, or, how you develop, what's next step for this framework?
Yes, sure. So as I was mentioning at the beginning, we are and just maybe as well responding to John's question in the chat, where if we are considering other policies domains outside of transport and care of isolated elderly, etc. And so our let's say our entry points are emissions, because we are really helping countries develop their net zero strategy. So that is always our entry point. We do so with a well-being lens, in the sense that climate policies that do not improve well-being, or climate policies that redesign systems that reduce emissions but are bad for well-being, don't make any sense. So we really, the entry point are emissions, but we have a broader perspective with well-being outcomes. Our next steps are to look into the residential sector in a similar way that we ask why people are choosing cars for the bulk of their trips, and what can we do about that to reduce emissions. We're asking ourselves why people are moving farther and farther away from inner centers, leading to urban sprawl, and what can we do to avoid that, to reduce emissions. The evidence suggests that urban sprawl is correlated with high emissions and with more difficult decarbonization. You have more detached houses, bigger houses that are more difficult to retrofit. You also have you also have more car-dependent territories, so you also have kind of emissions from the transport sector. So we're digging a little bit into the residential sector. We would like to move as well into food systems and energy sectors, but for that we still haven't had the chance to kind of the specific interest to work on that from countries.
Thank you. Yep. To avoid me dominating the Q&A, this next one. Any example of policy evaluation before implementing them? Any technique suggestions for policy validation?
I could need
Fahadi.
more. I'm not sure I understand your question, Farhadi. Do you mind taking the floor and telling me a little bit more of what you...
Yeah, Fahadi, feel free to unmute yourself and then, yeah.
Hi, Mariana. Thank you for the presentation. That was great. So currently there are lots of policies and you are describing that. So is there any way that we can do the policy evaluation by using like any systematic techniques or data-driven techniques? Are you already doing that, or is it something that, for example, there's other techniques for evaluation that I'm not aware of that maybe?
You mean policy evaluation after implementation?
No, before implementation.
Before, what do you put behind the term evaluation then? For me to make sure I understand.
Whether you reach the policy objective or not, let's say that the policy objective is reducing, let's say, NOx from this environment or this emission from this, I don't know, this particular area. Do you try to do any evaluation before actually implementing the policy in the actual, environment?
Okay.
Or maybe there is not anyway. Yeah.
Okay, so basically a little bit the assessment we have done with policies is in a sense, and if I understand correctly, that the sense that you're putting to the word evaluation is to us an evaluation of the transformative impact that policy can have. We haven't necessarily quantified that impact in particular. That's something we would like to get into, and we may be able to do in the future, for example, on road space reallocation. When it comes to policies that are on interactions of systems functioning, quantification becomes more difficult than just, for example, replacing vehicles. So we have done a little bit qualitative evaluations, and maybe just to mention where we are at in terms of the process. So we have done these recommendations to Ireland, and these recommendations are now feeding into the revision of their climate action plan for transport, for reducing emissions in transport. So they are revising their policies for the future, and of course now it's up to the Irish government to really see how to implement and advance, and potentially do as well an ex post evaluation of the policy impact, which could be really interesting if they get to implement those at scale.
Milos, please.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to see this work. OECD, at least from my perspective, it will be very useful to kind of explain. At least we're working in Finland, yeah, to kind of explain that if OECD is doing something, we should also be doing that. It's good to have that kind of excuse. Because this is also part of some kind of a systemic transformation, how we use these methods and so on. So thank you for that. But I have a question which is about political acceptability. We know we have a range of different policies, and we know their effectiveness in behavioral change, in sort of systemic transformation. We know that there is this big question behind. And then on the implementability side of these policies, I mean, yes, there are some issues with, public acceptance, but I'm more concerned about the political acceptance itself, because we still live in democracies, and oftentimes it's not actually people voting on policies, but it's politicians in kind of representative manner. And I'm afraid many politicians are using the status quo of kind of car dominated transport system to their advantage nowadays. So they're really not willing to kind of implement even simple policies like parking pricing, which is something that we have kind of known for a very long time should be done. Any kind of you might have not worked on a direct, I guess this work doesn't really lead to kind of actual decision making, vote taking in some parliament or city council and so on, but any sort of reflection or lessons on the political acceptability when you kind of start using some of these causal loop diagrams and so on.
Yeah, many thanks for that question. And the report just has led to some kind of discussions in Parliament, and I can share some of the media coverage and the parliamentary coverage as well that there has been, because it has been welcomed at that level. I could say that the experience that you mentioned about politicians using kind of car dependency and not wanted to implement, it's not the experience we had with Ireland. I guess in the country already, the fact that they were interested in this work shows that there was already kind of a seed there on something, on change, right? That's not always the case, and I am not sure. I mean, I am, but this is my personal conviction that we cannot convince anybody of anything, right? So there needs to be already the willingness to do things differently. And I could say that in terms of political acceptability, there are a few things that are in favor of this new method. Because, for example, a policy that is very well known and that we talk a lot about, which is carbon pricing, we see that there is an issue with political acceptability. And when we look at that, at carbon pricing from a systemic lens, looking at that from a systemic lens actually opens opportunities for more political acceptability of carbon pricing, because we are building the alternatives at the same time. So in a sense, I could say, I personally see a very positive message for politicians, in the sense that we can solve multiple problems at the time. We can increase the policy acceptability of some policies, and we can talk about well-being and climate at the same time. That said, I am not minimizing, for example, how difficult it is to implement road space reallocation. And that's why one of our key recommendations are communication efforts towards explaining to the population. And we compare, even we do stock and flow analysis with communication efforts from the automobile industry and from the government. And we see that there have been much more, I mean, you know, stories, of course, impact the reality we see, and there have been much more on car-centric models. So we need to communicate on sustainable models if we want people to be able to see those and to see the benefit of those. So communication expert to us is a key thing. But I could say, from your message, if the person you are talking to or the government is completely close to it, I am not sure we can do much about it, to be really honest, at least in my personal experience. But there are a lot of people in governments very interested. That's the good news. So we can maybe target those first.
Yes, would be wonderful to see
Thank you.
causal loop diagram mainstreaming in the public, to use this as a way to explain cause and effect, right? Thank you, Milos, for that. Yeah. Just to go to the chat box again, Jorge asked, is the team feeling the need to move from the quantitative model to quantitative model to explore dynamic and evaluate policies? So from York Salsa. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it would be great to get to quantitative modeling indeed. So far, it's interest and budget that goes with that interest for allowing us to do that type of work, and capacities as well to do that. We worked this, I don't know if Martin is here, we worked with Martin Grimeland, who is from the University of Bergen. He did his thesis related to the work we are doing, and he started doing a quantitative model on urban sprawl and how road space and road construction kind of leads to sprawl. It's still a model that has been calibrated to only one city, so it could need to be calibrated to several other cities too. So it's work in progress, let's say, but the interest is definitely there, and countries, and in particular countries, come to the OECD with request on quantitative analysis. So that's a little bit of something we would like to move towards if resources allow in the future. It could be really interesting.
I saw a remark from Daniela, but that's probably in response to Milos. So if you would like to add to that, please feel free to unmute yourself, and also Christine. I don't think we hear you yet, Daniela. Sorry. No.
Hi. Okay. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I was typing. Yeah, that was mainly a comment from me. We're using quite a lot. I work at the Center for Transport and Society. We're working on a European project on sustainable urban mobility planning. And we've used system thinking quite a lot. So we've used a very similar approach, but including not transport, also land use and telecommunication, looking more into sustainable accessibility of urban areas. And we have included also external variables, which are not related to these three systems, like social demographic variables, for example, or other things. The main thing for me is that we found several times that political will and public perception or public acceptance are still the strongest barrier, especially for those policies, as you said, like carbon pricing, that are not really popular. So I was wondering, what do you think system thinking, if it can do anything, what do you think, or how do you think this can be used to persuade these kind of actors to understand the real importance of implementing these kind of measures?
Yeah, maybe just to say that I hear one of the reasons why I got really happy when we discussed with Perafan with the idea of presenting this work here is also that I am very keen to learn from what you guys are doing on your side, because we are several people working on this field. So it could be great at a certain point to maybe have a mapping of who is doing what and see how we can maybe explore synergies. We may not have time today, but it could be great as well with universities and see how we can work together moving forward. Political will and public acceptance are a strong barrier, definitely. However, the example you provide on carbon pricing, in a sense, to me, it makes a lot of sense that there is a political, not political acceptability on carbon prices in systems where cars are the only and most attractive option, right? People do not have the possibility to switch to other alternatives. And that's where I think system thinking can help, because if some more policy attention goes into building that systems where alternatives are not only available, but the most attractive modes, then policies like carbon pricing can become more acceptable, because people can make the switch and they do not lose life quality by doing so, in a sense. I personally fairly understand people against carbon pricing if the car is the only means and it will just make their budget explode, right? So system thinking, I think, can shed light on the need to build a system that allows those sustainable options to become the best options, so that then policies like carbon pricing can be more acceptable and implemented as well at a more ambitious level, because it's policies that we definitely need to get there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, so do you think, for example, because what kind of stakeholders worked on your project? How did you create the causal loop diagrams? Because I missed the very first part, so I don't know if you already said it.
So basically, we work with several stakeholders. So we were already at the national, regional, and local level. We work with 4 territories representative of kind of Irish territories, urban, suburban, rural, etc. We work from people on the transport sector, housing, urban planning. We also work with kind of invited private sector providers of transport, etc. And we did several interviews with those people. We didn't do group modeling exercises. So we had a little bit the basic model, and we tailored it with information we received, and then we presented it and got their input and kind of validated. But that part we didn't co-construct. We more co-construct the part on the envisioning what do better systems look like, and the understand was an input for us to get into the transformative policy in a sense. So we also co-construct the policy side. But we did kind of consulted several stakeholders in our.
Okay, thanks. I will follow up maybe in private. I will contact you so we can actually compare and share.
Sure, please do. I will share as well my LinkedIn there in case you would like to connect.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting though.
Many thanks.
Thank you, Daniela. Any other question from the floor? Okay, that's a response to Christine. I mean, I have personally interest in one of the step, the visioning part of the 3 kind of triangle. I think Daniela's mentioned that visioning actually one of the most difficult steps to kind of change, to initiate the desire to change the system and how does this part of the activity
Yeah, no, definitely.
So now in your
and to me that is one as well where the action, a little bit the process needs to be as co-created as possible, because no one likes to be imposed a vision, right?
Right.
So in that sense, basically that part we had done some work on the importance, on the difference between mobility and because there is a conflation between more mobility equals more well-being, and we're arguing, well, not really. Accessibility, that is mobility and proximity, is a better proxy of well-being. So how do systems that provide accessibility look like, etc. And we did a few exercises in workshops. You saw a little bit the workshops in the first video. And we asked people, one of the key barriers we heard during the interviews was the Irish car culture, and that's something we hear in many other places. And that's one of the first exercises we did in workshops, was to say, well, and that car culture was perceived as the barrier for public acceptability. So we tried to do an exercise where basically we asked them to imagine, okay, today the situation is that private cars are no longer publicly acceptable. So the opposite of what we have today. And it was an imagination. It was just so that is the starting point of today's situation. For half an hour, let's see that's the reality. So how do you redesign your territory so that you meet people's need without private cars, because they don't want private cars anymore? So of course, it's just a workshop exercise, but that a little bit removed this barrier of car culture and kind of open the possibilities on what they could do. And it is mainly from there that we have defined there is a whole chapter that is called, it's the Envision chapter, where we explain that in much more detail. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I explained it properly.
Thank you. I see our chat box is very lively, so feel free to also unmute yourself and
yes, sorry, I'm not reading at all the chat. I don't follow. I'm sorry for that.
Yes. So Christine, any remark or things that you'd like to also share from where you are?
Oh yes, I'm from the United States. As you know, we have a lot of transport issues and culture. That's mainly what I was talking about, the car culture you just mentioned. And I said there is some stigma from what I hear from people outside of like New York City and Boston and other big cities that have good public transport. A lot of us, we won't take public transportation because mainly the poor take public transportation and we don't feel safe. And that's very hard to change. And then I forgot who commented about how this is, Maria, sorry, I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly, said that in the US, it's a spatial planning issue. Yeah, the space a long time ago was adapted to cars and not people, and hopefully that will change.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on the stigma question, I agree, and in many times it's not a perception, it's reality of what is today. Sometimes people say, well, people think that public transport is less comfortable than cars. Well, it is in many places. It actually is. But then how do we change that? And the fact that public transport is associated to the poor and that cars are associated to status, freedom, etc., it's not there by chance. It's almost a century of communication efforts. There is a very interesting historian, his name is Peter Norton, that explains that very nicely. I can share a few links if of interest, and that's why communication efforts on the other directions are needed. Otherwise, that other reality is not visible, right? Yeah. I don't know if there's any other hand. Otherwise, I have a question for you, actually. But
for me, I think there was another question
for you guys.
For the audience, I guess. But I saw Joseph just turn on his camera. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I did. It related to what Christine was describing. So geographically, this question of transportation varies quite a bit around the world as to what is the future going to look like. And my question was kind of around visioning. If we think about this as the kind of problem we're solving is a decade long. It's decades to solve it, right? It's multiple decades to solve it. What kinds of visions of success would we imagine in a decade by decade kind of view of the world? And it's not the world, it's really by country, right? how will Ireland evolve its transportation system in the next decade, in the next 2 decades, or France, or pick any geography that you like. What is the vision that we could think of on a decade by decade perspective? Setting that vision in place to inspire a country to say, yeah, this is where we want to get to, that journey that we're going to take. How important do we think that kind of visioning is needed in order to move societies to get to a particular goal? What are your thoughts on the necessity for visioning?
I mean, to me, it's fairly fundamental. We cannot. I mean, I often think about this as currently there is a current that's kind of the energy of the systems we have built. And with policies, we're trying to swim in against that current. We will not win. The system will always does. And we may do better if we instead kind of understand where we would like water to go and eventually start digging or doing some infrastructure so that the water naturally goes to that other direction. But for that to happen, we need to have an idea of that direction. That can be multiple directions, but at least an idea. And in a sense, to me, that's a key. I personally don't get to think about this without having an idea in mind of where I want to get. And I don't have a very defined idea of what each street looks like, but I do have an idea of the pattern of behavior that I want to see emerges from the system, for example, in this case. And that's where we focus our attention. And then what are the enabling conditions? What are the characteristics of systems that enable those patterns of behaviors? And I agree with you that it will take decades, but a lot of it can be done also fairly fast. And we saw that a little bit with COVID, and we see that in Paris a little bit right now, where the starting point is pretty bad for biking, etc. But a lot of the road reallocation does not imply new infrastructure. It implies just reallocating what is already there in a sense. So a lot can be done, I think, also in the short term. Of course, the spatial planning and the proximity, it's more of a longer term thing. But I think we need to communicate on both, because sometimes it is it can be scary as well for policymakers interested in this to say, well, this will only arrive in 30 years, because then what can I do now, in a sense?
Well, and Marija is commenting about the speed in her city. I do think it's very geographically dependent on the velocity. That, I mean, I think about the US. It's so hard to bring about change in the US. It seems like it's so hard to bring about change that it seems like it's a decade-long problem, or decades to get to where a vision of what we would want. But other countries and other cities may be much more progressive on how quickly they can move to a different vision of transportation.
And do you have an idea on what do you attribute that difference to?
Well, some of it is certainly the political process. Some of it is the cultural aspects of and the political process is tied to the economic, the spending levels, right? How much do you want to spend to, if I look at, I have familiarity with the New York City subway system. There are billions of dollars you would need to spend to modernize the New York City subway system. If there's a will to do it, right, you have to allocate the resources to do it. But currently, I would say that will doesn't exist.
Maria, you would like to add a remark? I saw you just.
Yeah, but my question to John would be, but what about the new Biden large-scale investment plan? Joseph, what about the large-scale investment plan of Biden? Because what we can see in the US and specifically in California, even in the 80s, they wanted to bring a new legislation where they would put forward electric cars, but it was stopped by the lobbying industry. So my question to you is, you really don't think that this new large-scale green investment is going to change things?
Well, it's not enough. It's a step, but the dollars that were allocated are not enough to really achieve the vision. It depends how big your vision is, but the dollars are really not enough to achieve a zero. I don't even want to say a zero. Let's say a zero emissions vision, right? How much spending do you have to get to a zero emissions vision for transportation? With not just moving to EVs, but moving more to mass transportation. The EV momentum, there's a very real momentum towards EVs. That's just moving the car culture from internal combustion engine to EVs. That's all it's doing. It's not changing the road systems at all.
Yeah. May I verify? We have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to kind of go back to that. So maybe you have a question for us, right? Sorry,
yes,
Joseph,
yes.
to
I had a question
to...
for you because one thing. So we have launched a housing special interest group in the Systems Dynamic Society. So already wanted to know if any of you could be interested in joining that. So there we have done our first event beginning of December, and we will do probably a second one in January, presenting the causal loop diagrams we are developing on urban sprawl. As I mentioned before, I could be really keen on learning what you guys are doing on your side. I'm sure there are synergies and we can learn from each other. So I was wondering how can this group facilitate that? Could we, I mean, we can of course chat bilaterally with those of you that are interested, but how can we do that more systematically? How can we share that information? Is that a mechanism that exists already? Maybe I'm just not aware to it. I'm new to the society. So yeah, that was my question.
I think Simon Shepherd, who was also in the committee, is here, so maybe he can help with this. But I think the group can definitely, facilitate this by, circulate the mailing a mail to invite to a meeting that maybe you would like to hold up on to discuss this further. That's definitely a possibility, and we can raise awareness. That's for sure. And then Christine here, who is also a system dynamic of society. She's also perhaps can also help with that as well, right?
Yeah, I'm just a volunteer. I don't actually work for the society even. Actually,
okay,
I think we have a couple. It's okay. If people get confused, they were debating about hiring me, but then I ended up working somewhere else because they did.
Okay.
The other group needed to move. Anyway, that's not important. But I think we actually have a couple of SIG leaders here. I help organize the economic SIG and the water SIG. And Joseph is environmental, and I think
environmental SIG.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So. Because maybe between environmental, transport, and housing, there is something we can do maybe together. So just wanted to mention that interest on at least on our side. We also have I will be sharing on LinkedIn an internship position for a systems dynamicist in our team. So if you know people, please connect on LinkedIn, and I will be sharing that tomorrow or after tomorrow. Please, I would really appreciate if you can share it around.
And if you're a member of the System Dynamic Society, if you go on the calendar, the event page, you can submit an event and it'll go on the calendar, and then I'll see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Super.
So just the last word, maybe Mariana, any final word from you?
Yeah.
On my side,
yeah.
Well, already to thank you again for your interest. I hope there was some interest for you as well. For me it was very interesting to present the work to you, and hopefully we will remain in touch with some of you and learn from each other moving forward. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, we thank you too for a wonderful presentation, and it's really enlightening to see the work of OECD, trying to mainstreaming this system dynamic conversation, in particular the transport field, and maybe further. So I think thanks for the audience to join us today, and I hope that you keep in touch by please join our Transport 6 group, and we still have 2 more lectures in this series to come after New Year. And I wish you wonderful festive season, and see you next year. Yeah, thank you very much.
Many thanks. Happy New Year to all.
Thank you.
Bye.